Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para X.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. And tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
I was going to say maybe. And we got Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
He's still with us. And speaking of those from around the world, where do we have listeners at tonight?
Tonight, Henry, they're coming in from all over the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Germany.
All right, Germany. Haven't heard from them for a while. I hope they're enjoying the show. And our special guest with us tonight is Kandra Payne, and we're talking about her book, Haunted Creede, which is very interesting. Welcome back, Kandra.
Thank you.
See, that wasn't too bad, was it?
No, this is a lot of fun. My first radio gig.
Now, you talk some about Jimtown. Now, was Jimtown the first name of the place and then it become Creede, or was it a different location altogether?
It's interesting because the Creede camp started in this little area, in a very narrow area of the canyon, and it sort of expanded as more and more people came. It moved down the canyon to where the canyon kind of opens up, and then it really expanded, and that's what they called Jimtown. So it's about a mile south of where the original Creede camp started. They called it Jimtown. Later, it became everything. All of that became Creede. But originally, it was in 1892 called Jimtown, which was just about a mile south of the original camp of Creede. And the little area of that canyon that had stretched down, that was called Stringtown. So there were sort of three little areas all in a line there down the canyon.
And where did most of the killings take place? Was that in Jimtown or Creede?
Oh, there were some in both. But those wild saloons were up in the original camp of Creede, the Holy Moses Saloon and the Junction Saloon, where Lily shot and killed Billy Rummage. But Jimtown definitely had its share of shoot-ups too.
So we were talking about the Creede Hotel or Zang Hotel. Later on, I guess after it became the Creede Hotel, you talk about the many different ghosts that are there, and you talk about some of the ghosts. So you want to talk a little bit about what some of the ghosts are that people seen and talked about?
Sure. So I think, like I said, I think the main spirit haunting the Creede Hotel is Lizzie Zhang. So that people often see this older woman with white hair, and apparently has a long white hair. Sometimes it's down, but often it's pulled up into a bun. But many people describe the same older woman that they see again and again. And that's the main spirit that's seen. Some of the ghosts are sort of tricksters, and they play tricks on different people and scare them. The Creede Hotel stories are the ones that I heard earliest as a child. My Aunt Jenny Kay worked at the hotel, and she's pretty sensitive to those things. But she had a lot of stories about things that happened to her, and some of those are in the book. But one of the first that I remember hearing was she would cook breakfast at the hotel, and then she also would help clean the rooms and turn them over. So when she was done cooking breakfast, she would do that. And one day she was changing over a room and remaking the bed, and she just felt like something was in the room with her. Someone was watching her, and she felt very uncomfortable, and she just wanted to get it finished. So she wanted to get the job done and get out of there. But the longer she was in there, the more uncomfortable she felt. And she said as she was finishing up making the bed, she just felt like she was ready to scream. She was so scared at that point that something was in that room with her. And she looked up into the mirror, which was across the room. There was this old vanity with a big mirror. And she looked at herself in the mirror and saw that every hair on her head was just standing straight out. And she screamed quite loudly and then ran out of the room and down the stairs. And apparently she told the owner of the hotel that she wasn't going to do that part of the job anymore. She would still cook, but she was never going upstairs again. And she was so terrified that had happened to her.
Well, that's what happens when you try. That's what happens when you try and make Nikola Tesla's bed.
Right. Her husband used to tell her, "Oh, you're crazy. That was just the static electricity from the sheets." And she said, "You might think that, but I know differently."
Although that's usually my reaction when I realize I have to put on a fitted sheet.
Right? Or fold one. That's the hardest thing to do.
Exactly.
But she had another really great story. That's probably one of my favorites from the Creede Hotel. And that was one winter evening, she and her husband had gone to the movies, and they drove back into town. So Creede doesn't have a movie theater. In fact, the closest movie theater is 45 minutes away.
Wow.
Actually, an hour away in Monte Vista, Colorado. And they came back to town, and they drove up Main Street and then turned around and went home. And as they drove up Main Street, they went past the hotel. And this was a point in time when, in the winter, most of the businesses close in Creede because Creede's a tourist town, and in summer the weather's beautiful and everyone comes to Creede. But in the winter, a lot of the businesses would close down, and the Creede Hotel was one of those businesses that's only open in the summer. But they drove past the Creede Hotel. This was sometime in December, and drove home. And they got into their driveway, and my aunt turned to my uncle, and she said, "I wonder what was going on at the Creede Hotel. There's some kind of big party." And he said, "What are you talking about? It's the middle of winter. Nothing's going on at the hotel." And she said, "No, Kurt, I saw through the window. There were people in there. I think it might have been a costume party." And he was so intrigued. He said, I think you're crazy, but we'll drive back up through town." They drove back up, and the hotel was just as dark and dead and quiet as it should have been in the middle of the winter. But she said she can still see the people that were sitting in there playing cards. She could see there was this man with a beard who was laughing. But she saw this party as clear as day. And she remembers it. And it's interesting. So I started doing my research on Creede and what happened, back in the day. And I was reading these old newspaper articles. And there's this article about how Lizzie Zhang threw this huge party for John Zhang on his 55th birthday. And this was only 6 months before he was going to be killed. But they had this big party, and it said it lasted until the wee hours of the morning. And as soon as I read about that party, I knew that that's what Jenny Kay saw, that my aunt saw that party happening. John Zhang's birthday, I couldn't believe it when I read this, it was December the 15th. So I think she saw the residual haunting. She saw that night of that party.
I was going to say, what about haunted hotels in Colorado in the winter with
right?
The Shining.
The Shining. Right. Yeah, those residual hauntings.
So nobody in the wintertime is in the hotel at all?
No. In fact, I think they drain the water and close it down completely.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, and it's an old building, so it would take a lot to keep it open and to keep it heated and, keep the pipes from freezing, all of that.
Yeah,
She may have also experienced what's known as a time slip, where she was seeing into the past.
Yeah, that's a possibility too. What would you say would be the distinguishing characteristics between a time slip and a residual haunting? How would you tell the difference?
Well, she went by in a car. I think if it was a residual haunting, you could probably walk into the place. I think with a time slip, either it's kind of vague. It depends on the situation. I've heard tales of people who have found hotels in the middle of nowhere. They've gone in, spent the night, left the money because there was nobody at the desk in the morning, and they left, and then they realized they went back. They forgot something and went back, and it was all run down, had been abandoned for years, and their money was still on the counter.
Wow. Oh, that's crazy.
Now that would be a ghost story.
No kidding.
Yeah. Now, you talk about other little towns or communities or places along the way, and you had to enter a ghost in Del Norte.
Yes. And the reason I told that story, so I had always heard that there was this haunted hotel in Del Norte. In Colorado, we say Del Norte. We don't say it correctly. But in the 90s, they did this renovation, and it had been sitting abandoned and empty for a long time, but they did this renovation. They reopened the hotel, and it's a beautiful old hotel. They have a great restaurant. But I had always heard it was haunted. And then I started doing my research about Creede, and I figured out who the ghost was. And the ghost in the hotel in Del Norte is a Creede girl. Her name is Maud Hines, and she was moved to Creede as a young child, and her father owned a saloon. But her family had, and she was a violinist, and her sister played the piano, and her brother played an instrument. They had this little orchestra. They called it the Hines Orchestra, and she played in that orchestra, and she was a very talented musician. But Maud was 26 years old, and she got engaged to a gentleman who was a brakeman on the DNRG Railroad, along with her brother Charlie. And they got engaged, and a couple of months later, he made up with his ex-girlfriend and he asked Maud to be released from his promise to marry her. And at that point, she said, if you feel like you love someone better than you love me, then by all means, I will release you from this promise. But that very day, she got on the train, and she went to Del Norte. She checked into that fancy hotel, the Windsor Hotel. She checked in, dropped off her stuff, went down the street and bought a gun. When they tried to show her how to clean and use the gun, she said, "I know as much about guns as you do," which sounds like a Creede girl for sure. But she went back to the hotel and shot herself through the heart. So Maud's ghost is the one haunting the Windsor Hotel. It's a very sad story.
Yes, it was. She got jilted. And
She did, yeah.
a lot of times when you get jilted, you don't just do away with yourself, you do away with the one that jilted you.
Right. Yes. She did not do that, luckily.
Yeah. You have to be careful about jilting somebody back then.
Right. When guns were so ubiquitous.
And that was in the Del Norte Hotel, right?
Yeah, it's called the Windsor Hotel, which is in Del Norte, Colorado.
And how far away is that from Creede?
It's a 45-minute drive.
Ah, okay. So that would have been like one of the stagecoach stops along the way?
It was at one point, but by that point the train was running. This was in 1906.
Okay.
But she took the train.
Okay. So how big of a town is Del Norte?
It's not very big either, but it is bigger than Creede.
Ah, okay.
It must have, boy, I don't want to get this wrong, but maybe 1,000 residents.
Wow. That's big, isn't it?
Compared to 300, yeah.
Okay. You talk, I guess they had and a stage. I'm not talking about the stagecoach. I'm talking about a theater stage there that the people would perform plays and things like that. And that's still standing, right?
The theater that's there now is not one of the ones that was built in the 1890s, no. The theater that's there now was actually built as a movie theater in the 1930s and then later became live theater,
So
a repertory theater.
So you got one story that was in there called "A Ghost is Summoned to the Stage."
Yes. Should I tell that story?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So one of the actresses, one summer they did a show called "The Man Who Shot the Man Who Shot Jesse James." So it brought to life on stage a lot of those characters that we've been talking about from the Wild West, Bob Ford and, various dance hall girls and saloon keepers, and Ed O'Kelly, who was possibly a member of the James Gang. So it was about, Creed's early days. And one night, one of the actresses just felt inspired, and she was doing her vocal warm-ups out behind the theater, and there's this little bridge that goes over Willow Creek, which runs right behind the theater. And she stood on that bridge, and she looked up at the cliffs that sort of tower over Main Street. And she said she threw her arms wide in the air, and she said, "Spirits of Creede, join me on stage tonight." And then she went back in and performed the show. And she said she was a little disappointed because nothing really happened. The show went on as usual, but there were nothing, extraordinary happened. But as she was leaving the theater that night and walking home alone in the dark, that she realized that invocation had worked and that she was being followed home by some kind of spirit. And she was terrified. She ran into her house and locked the door. And, of course, locks don't work against ghosts, right? But she was sort of physically attacked by this spirit that she had sort of called forth. And it's interesting because I later learned in my research that a lot of times ghosts are more able to materialize near running water, that they draw energy from that water. Have you all heard that before?
Yes.
On your show? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that invocation was made even more powerful by the fact that she was standing there on that bridge over the running water. And this spirit terrorized her for quite a few days before she called in someone who was known to be able to exorcise those kind of spirits. And this other woman came in and was able to do that. But she said it was a tough spirit to get rid of, and it was a scary one.
Well,
so that's one of the scarier stories, I think, in the book.
Did she just feel that, or did she actually see a spirit?
She doesn't talk about seeing it, but she felt it. She was like thrown to the ground and her pinned down, and from what I understand, she did not see it.
Yeah, that sounds pretty violent.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about some of the helpful ghosts there, and this leads up to what you're talking about now. And as much violence happening in those days, and as aggressive as some of the residents seem to have been, are there more cases of more malevolent type of hauntings?
Some of the hotel stories are a little scarier, but that's probably the most malevolent ghost we have that I've heard of in Creede. But some of the hotel spirits are more tricksters. They like to scare people in ways that aren't always a lot of fun. There was one gentleman who he and his wife had eaten dinner, and they went up to their room, above the hotel or above the restaurant, and they were getting ready for bed. And he went out on the balcony, which overlooks Main Street. He went out to read, and his wife went in to take a shower. And he started to feel really sleepy. And at a certain point, he went back in and climbed in bed next to his wife, who he assumed was already sleeping. And he was laying there, and he just started feeling really sort of uncomfortable and scared, and had this feeling of terror welling up in him. And he didn't know what was happening or why he would have that feeling. And all of a sudden, he heard the bathroom door open, like creaked open, and his wife came out. And he jumped out of bed and looked at that lump that he had assumed was his wife, and it had disappeared. So he didn't know what he had been in bed next to. Wow. But it was one of those spirits.
Wow.
Now, that would be scary.
Yeah.
I've heard stories like that where you're with somebody and they're not really there, or it's not really them, and you go in another room and they're already in another room, and you want to know how they got there so fast or something.
Right.
And they say, "I've been here all the time," So I have heard stories like that.
It's like when people are cats.
When they're what?
Cats.
Cats.
Oh, cats. Yeah.
Teleport all over the place.
Now, you talk also in your book about haunted houses in Creede, and one of the ones you talked about was Mr. Tingley. So, what was
Yes.
Mr. Tingley?
Mr. Tingley apparently was a sawmill man, and he lived on the same street that I grew up on. I grew up on East 6th, and Mr. Tingley was on West 6th, but many years before I was ever there. But he was a sawmill man, and he also had this little side business. He was a moonshiner, and during Prohibition, he made moonshine and sold it to the tourists or whoever wanted to buy this illegal whiskey that he was making. And he was apparently quite a character. And I had heard about his ghost from some friends who live in the house that's now built sort of over where Mr. Tingley's cabin was. So she had, had these hauntings, this experience that her house was haunted, and she found out from her father-in-law that was Mr. Tingley, that he thought that was Mr. Tingley's ghost.
So did they actually see it or just feel it?
They did not see him. He plays a lot of tricks on them. He would lock their door as soon as they would leave without their keys. Most people don't really lock their door in Creede. It's just really not much of a point, But he would lock the door, and they would not be able to get back in until they could figure out, get a locksmith or find someone else who had the key. He would do that. He would also hide things, like he hid her husband's wallet, and they looked for hours for this wallet. And finally, they just, went to bed. And the next morning, the wallet was laying in the middle of the kitchen table.
Wow.
There was that. He also, they heard him a lot. He would bang the toilet seat up and down. And that's how they actually figured out who it was, because apparently he would bang the toilet seat up and down, and they would never be able to figure out what that noise was or what could have been causing that noise. But one day, my friend Iris and her husband had their in-laws over for dinner, and they were all playing cards, and that sound started again, that banging, and they went to investigate, and nothing was down there. And Sam, who was Iris's father-in-law, said, that's just Mr. Tingley. This house sits over where his cabin was, and he never had indoor plumbing. He's trying to figure out what that contraption is that's in the middle of his cabin.
Huh. Wow.
And in the book, I say, I think he's trying to figure out if it's something he can make moonshine in, right?
So you say there's about 300 people that live there now.
Yeah.
Do they have sheriff department or police department?
Yeah, they do. You have a sheriff and a couple of deputies.
Wow.
County sheriff.
Okay, county. Did they have much problems with lawbreakers, you might say?
I don't think there's not a lot of crime in Creede that I know of. There's been a bit more, I don't know how recently, but not too much. I don't think so.
Okay, which is pretty nice. They don't have movie halls. Do they have a bank?
Yes, there is a bank. Luckily, we still have a bank. No movie. There's the live theater, but it operates during the summer and the fall.
Okay.
And of course, they haven't been able to do much this summer either.
Right. Nobody has really, but.
Right.
So, I guess then they don't have movies. They don't have. How about TV? Can they get TV, or do they have cable?
They do. They have cable and high-speed internet, and all of that's come to Creede. So yeah, they've got all of the.
So they've got the
media.
modern conveniences, more or less. That's pretty interesting.
You broke up there. What was the question?
I said they have most of the modern conveniences.
Yes.
Yeah, which is good then. So I know you said that the Zhang Hotel back then was a pretty good restaurant. Now, do they have other restaurants and stuff in the town now?
They do. In fact, there's a very good restaurant in the Creede Hotel now. And there are a couple of other restaurants. Let's see, 2 or 3. Yeah. MJ's Cafe is very good. There's a place called the Blue Moose, and my friend Marcia runs what's called Cafe Olay. So yeah, we have a few restaurants. There's a pizza place.
All right. They've grown up.
And
then.
of course, a few of them are year round, but most of the business is in the summer.
So what does the people do for jobs and stuff if it's pretty much locked up during the winter?
Right. Well, a lot of people have to make their living during those 3 or 4 months during the tourist season. You know, there are a lot of people that do that. And some of them, you know, do run like the grocery store or the gas station. But there's no industry like mining anymore. So
Right.
there are a lot of people who have second homes there or have retired and moved to Creede. Yeah, the theater still, I think, employs maybe 10 or 12 people that are there year-round. And during the summer, they're the biggest employer, one of the biggest employers in Mineral County, the theater is.
Wow.
They bring in quite a crew.
Huh. Wow. One of the other houses you talked about that was haunted in Creede, the parlor house.
Yes. That's and I didn't realize that that's what it had been until I started doing my research. But when I was growing up, one of my Girl Scout leaders lived in that house. She still lives there. But her husband loved to tell us, you know, stories about how the ghost would send things down the laundry chute. And, you know, he loved scaring us. And of course, we loved hearing these stories. But later, when I started doing my research, I realized that Creede didn't really have a red light district like a lot of these little mining camps did. They all had like a row of these little bordellos or brothels. But Creeds were kind of scattered around, and this was one of them. I found an account in one of the books. It's a memoir written by this gentleman named Edwin Bennett. And he talked about how he had, you know, a young man growing up in the town, and he had this experience where there was this young lady waiting on the platform at the train, and she was waiting for someone to pick her up, and no one ever showed up, and she didn't know how to get to where she was going, and he ended up leading her to Lillis's house, which was what's the parlor house. Creede Lill was one of Creede's most famous madams, and he talked about in the book how they walked down Rio Grande Avenue and turned left onto 6th Street, and there they were at Lil's house. And so I knew exactly that was the house that's on that corner there of Rio Grande and 6th Street. So I knew that was Creede Lil's house, and it turns out that was the house that, you know, my Girl Scout troop leader still lives in.
Huh. Wow.
So it's funny that we'd heard these stories. And then I ended up finding the picture of Creede Lill, which is at a museum in Cripple Creek, Colorado. Like, no one in Creede has that picture, but they have it at this museum in Cripple Creek. It was kind of fun. It was great to put a face to a name.
Wow.
And I was really happy that we could put that picture in the book.
Yes. And the old pictures that are in the book is great because it helps for you to look and see what it looked like back during those days.
Right.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Barbara, you still with us?
Yeah. You're talking about the Palmer guy and the Joe Palmer thing. And I'm reading this passage about the Orleans kid.
Mm-hmm.
And how the heck do you get your thumbs shot off in a gunfight?
Isn't that just crazy? Like, I think the Orleans kid or Louisiana kid, he's called by those two different names, but we never know his real name. But yeah, he must have been a pretty good marksman to shoot off both of Joe Palmer's thumbs, right?
Yeah.
And it's so funny because, you know, Poker Alice has this account of that gunfight that I put in the book in its entirety because it's just so great to hear about the gunfight in her own words. But she talks about it, and she talks about how after that fight, you know, they hear Joe Palmer's like crying, and he earned the nickname Crybaby Joe. Wow. If I had both of my thumbs shot off, I think I would have the right to cry about it. But it was a tougher lot back then in Creede, Colorado, I guess.
Well,
I'm trying to figure out if you're shooting. He had his hands on a gun, obviously, right? How the
Yeah,
heck did
he
you
had a
shoot
revolver. Right, and there's another account of how he kept going, even after his thumbs were shot off, and he would cock the gun. He would like push it down his leg to cock the gun, and then shoot it. So he was pretty tough. I wouldn't call him a crybaby.
Huh. Wow.
Well, even trying to grip a gun without a thumb.
I
That'd be
know,
difficult.
right? How do
That'd be
I
awful
don't know.
hard. Because
And you don't know how much of these accounts are just legend, right? So
I don't know.
I have a picture of Joe Palmer, and it had to have been taken before the gunshot because you can see both of his thumbs very clearly. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a high enough resolution picture to put it in the book.
So what? Who was he fighting against when that took place?
This character called the Louisiana Kid.
And this one that shot
outlaw.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Joe Palmer was one. He managed the Orleans Club, which was Soapy Smith's club, and he was a member of the Soap Gang. And he was a pretty bad character in his own right.
Yeah. Wow.
So this Orleans Kid was basically just, I would assume, a gunslinger, or he was an outlaw and not looking for that kind of reputation, but more just as a thief.
He was an outlaw. I think he had a reputation of murdering quite a few people. They talked about a little bit about that in the paper. And he came into Soapy's club and didn't feel like he was being treated very fairly. He lost quite a bit of money. And then he went outside the club and laid in wait for Joe Palmer to come out later that night and then tried to kill him. And then Joe Palmer, they had this big shoot 'em up out in the street. And people were fleeing into other saloons trying to get out of their way. But
so the gunfight in the middle of the street is a real thing. It's not a cliche.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the Louisiana Kid is the one that we think became McGinty. According to Jeff Smith's theory, he's the one that was killed and then sent away to be preserved and brought back and put on display.
Wow. You figure out in the middle of nowhere, if he rode off somewhere, nobody was going to figure out what happened to him.
Right, and the last account is he was headed out south on the pike with some pretty major injuries. But yeah, it's very possible maybe.
Yeah.
Soapy and his gang did find it. It was in February in Creede, so it would have been super cold at night. And I don't know how you'd survive out exposed to the elements like that with wounds like that.
So Barbara, did you have pictures, some of the pictures that she has in the book?
Some of them, yes.
They had one called the Business Along Cliff Street, and it shows how the town is built right up against this rock wall cliffs.
Yeah.
Can you post one of those in the chat room?
I can try.
Okay.
Like a miniature version of Minas Tirith?
Kind of. Those are really tall cliffs.
They are.
It's amazing how, that's what I was saying, I can't imagine wintertime there with just the sheer amount of snowfall and the winds going through. It must have been very difficult.
Yeah, and Creede's at almost 9,000 feet, so it's very high elevation.
Yeah, that would be very, very bad on that. Yeah.
No, not a lot of jogging.
Yeah, but think of the sledding.
That's true.
Yeah.
If you got you a
A lot
good
of great sledding.
yeah, you got you a good sled, you can go down that hill.
Yeah. Good luck.
Real interesting. And you had regular stage coaches and horses and everything right there in that little mining camp. And I'm sure that there was a lot of arguing and fighting and probably killings over some of that stuff.
Yeah, probably. I'm not sure how long the stagecoach ran. I think once the trains were running, they didn't really run the stagecoach through there anymore.
Right. Well, one of the other haunted houses you talked about was the Rio Grande Hotel, which was different than the Zhang Hotel.
Yeah, so the Rio Grande Hotel was actually built by the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad to house their employees. at the height of the boom. So when they first brought the train into town, they built this hotel to house their employees. And after about 10 years, they didn't need it anymore, and they sold it to a Creede business owner, and his family moved in to the house. It's huge, must be 8 or 10 bedrooms, and big kitchen and dining room and a parlor. And it's since been converted into the boarding house for the Creede Repertory Theatre. But a lot of people who have lived there or stayed there have had experiences with the ghost.
Huh.
But when I was a kid, it was, abandoned and really run down and really spooky. And there are a lot of stories about it being haunted, but there's some good stories in the book that I found from the time that it was abandoned. But yeah, since they did a big renovation and remodeled it and brought it up to, well, they had a historic grant to help renovate it. But apparently the ghosts are still there. I hear that they are still there.
Now, Barbara's posted a couple of the pictures in the chat room. So,
Oh, great.
yeah, and it shows, I think the second one she posted, I think was like from 1942 or something like that. So it shows how it's built right with the cliffs and all in this little canyon. It's pretty interesting. And Coffee said, "Wow, I want to go there now."
I hope that the book does inspire people to visit, because it's such a great little town, and there's so much to do, and it's such a beautiful place in the summer. And I hope that people will come and visit.
I'm impressed that, considering that most theaters are haunted anyway, that this theater came prepackaged with ghosts.
Well, now, do they, during the summertime, have any kind of reenactments?
They don't in Creede. Well, we did for the 125th anniversary, they did a reenactment of Bob Ford's death.
Ah.
And that was a lot of fun. But it wasn't done by the theater. It was done by some members of the Historical Society. But it's not a yearly thing that they've done. Over the hill in Lake City, they do a reenactment, or they used to. I'm not sure if they do anymore, but they did a reenactment of the trial of Alfred Packer, Colorado's cannibal, which I am not sure you guys have heard about, but he apparently ate some members of his party. They got snowed in.
Oh, was that up at the Gap where they were all, I guess, dying and had to eat one another to try and survive?
It's not the Donner Party, no.
Yeah. Oh,
It's not the Donner Party, but it's sort of a
Okay.
similar story over near Lake City, Colorado, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Where they got stranded in the snow, and in order to survive, or I don't know, because he was crazy, he did end up eating other members of his party.
Huh. I hadn't heard of that one. Wow.
But they do a reenactment of his trial over there in the courthouse, which was there during his trial.
They say they didn't reenact his cooking.
Right? We hope.
We already.
Although there are restaurants called, the Alfred Packer Bar and Grill.
Oh gosh, I'm not eating there.
Really? Hannibal Lecter's the chef.
Yeah, you really wouldn't be getting a leg of lamb; it'd be a leg of something else. Now, somebody already posted in the chat room that they want to take the ghost tour there.
Great. I'm really hoping we can do it again next summer,
Yeah.
Fingers crossed that there will be a vaccine and we'll all be.
That's what I'm hoping for too. I'm ready to start trying to do a few things around.
Yeah.
So I think one of the other stories you got in the book that you talk about is the Dwyer House.
Right. Yeah, so that's one of Creede's oldest houses, and it's still owned by the same family who built it.
Really?
In Creede back in the 1890s.
Wow.
Yeah. My high school English teacher is part of that family, and his mother had inherited the house, and he lived in it for a while. And when I was a kid, I would walk by that house, and everyone just thought it was haunted because it's a scary looking little Victorian house, and it has lace curtains in the window. I read somewhere that if you want your house to look haunted, you should hang lace curtains, right? But it definitely looks pretty haunted, and I had always heard these stories, and I would walk by it because I was sort of drawn to it, but terrified of it at the same time. And I just knew I would see a face looking out of one of those windows one day. But it never happened, and I never heard the actual ghost story. I just sort of knew that it was haunted. And when I was collecting stories for the book, I asked John Goss, my English teacher, about what the actual story was. Because the Historical Society actually printed in one of their brochures, that the Dwyer house being one of the oldest houses and how it has a family ghost story. And so I asked him, and he said, well, I'll tell you the story, but you might be a little disappointed. And I said, okay, well, I'd love to hear it. And he said, Kandra, I lived in the house, and I was convinced I would see a ghost, and I never did. But all of my students at school would ask me, is the house haunted? And he said he never really would say one way or another, but he just kind of led them to believe that it was haunted. So the kids were pretty scared of it. And then at a certain point, he was going to get married, and he was moving out of the old house and into, as I say in the book, a less drafty house, a newer house with his bride. And he was, a little worried about the family home standing empty and abandoned, and he was afraid kids might break in or... So he was a little more vocal about how Uncle Martin's still at the house and Uncle Martin's ghost is still around. So it became one of those sort of urban legends that the house was haunted when really maybe no one had really seen a ghost.
Wow.
Although after that, John's sisters have said that they do believe it's haunted, and they have some stories to tell about the ghost. So it might actually be haunted.
Wow.
But I thought that was kind of a fun story to just, to include in the book about how some places might get the reputation of being haunted, even though there's not really much activity.
Well, it's a great book called Haunted Creede, and I encourage people to go out and get it because there's a lot more in the book than what we've covered in the 2 hours. And the pictures that are in there, she shows different places that she's been talking about. And it's really great. And I mean, they're the old time pictures, which is very interesting. So you need to go out and get this book. It's great. Now, you got any other questions here, Barbara?
Well, I was just thinking that if there is a small population that stays in the town, and winter, I can't imagine how much snowfall you get there, and you're kind of probably pretty much trapped there for a while, that ghost stories would be really prevalent there if there were any active hauntings.
Right. Except I think a lot of the places that are haunted are sort of closed up in the winter.
Oh, really?
So the residential houses are probably all new.
A lot of them. Yeah, like a lot of those old Victorians sort of burned down in that fire. So unlike Leadville, Colorado, which has a lot of their original Victorians, and Lake City does as well, but Creede doesn't have a lot of the older houses left.
More modern.
Oh, yeah. There are quite a few more that are more modern.
And there's probably not any remnants of what the old town part was, such as the bars and stuff like that. They've probably all been removed.
Well, a few places do still, like the Creede Hotel. That was one that, was rebuilt right away in 1892, and it is still there. So there are a few. It still has the feeling of an old mining town. I mean, in its main street, you can look at it and see that it, was built in the 1890s.
Wow.
Well, I was looking. I was going to say I was looking for the website on the Grand Hotel, the hotel and all, and there was a.
You're gone, Jeff. Well, maybe you'll come back in a minute.
Of the.
I know. I really want to hear that question.
Yeah, we lost you there for a minute, Jeff. Try again.
mountains in the
You're still breaking up. We can't hear
distance.
you.
A crack between them for the road.
Jeff, you're breaking up. We can't hear you.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Because it always happens.
Well, maybe you'll get. Are you back now? He must not
Nope.
even be hearing
No.
us. Yeah. Because you're breaking up. We can't even hear you. Okay.
I'm not trying to speak. I've given up.
Oh.
Okay.
But we can hear you now.
So the houses that are there are probably built on the ashes and the ruins of the older homes that were burned down.
Right. I think like Mr. Tingley's shack, now has another house over it, right? But yeah, there are a few left, a few of those old Victorians and a few houses.
And so people drive by the houses that are the hotels that are boarded up for the wintertime. And are there more reports other than the one that see parties and other activity going on in the hotels?
That's the only account of that happening that I know of. Although I haven't heard everyone's story, right? And since the book came out, I am getting people who will, email me or tell me, oh yes, I had an experience at the Creede Hotel too. So
Good.
there's still activity, for sure.
Okay, I got a question from Lily in the chat room. She wanted to know, are there Native American ghosts there?
That's I'm not sure. In the introduction to the book, I talk about how, as a child, we would travel through what was called Wagon Wheel Gap, which is sort of a narrow area where the Rio Grande River runs through and the highway cuts through. It's a very narrow area between two cliffs. And the story that I later heard, and as a child, I was always sort of just terrified of that area for some reason. There's a mountain that looks like the head and shoulders of a monster coming up out of the earth. And that's what I saw and was terrified of. I just knew it was going to continue to rise one day and sort of smash our car. But later, when I did this research, I learned that when the Utes occupied that area, and Creede was one of their main hunting camps, it was a really good area that they would go to only in the summer. It was a little too harsh for them to live there in the winter, but this was this land that was really sort of special to them. And when the settlers started coming through, they would wait on the top of those cliffs and then ambush the settlers as they came through that cut and scalp people and then hang those scalps on a rope across between the narrowest part of those two cliffs as a warning sign to anyone else who might come through and try to invade their territory. And I thought it was really interesting that that's exactly where I was having all of this terror as a child going through that area of the canyon. So I think there might be some ghosts still there at the Wagon Wheel Gap.
Huh.
Jeff was saying that the photographs that he was looking at are very Tolkien-esque, that they look like the elf mines of Mornia, which, if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings, these huge, I can't imagine living there as a child and seeing dwarves. Thank you. Sorry, Jeff. Mountains are scary to me as it is, but to grow up with those looming mountains over your head must have been interesting.
It was interesting, and I think it's something that to me was just comforting in a way, because I remember the first time we sort of traveled out of the mountains and spent any amount of time, I felt a little bit lost, and when we came back to Creede and sort of the shelter of those mountains, I immediately was at ease again and felt at home, like those mountains in a way are comforting, even though that one mountain, the Monster Mountain, was still scary.
And now I gotta search up that Monster Mountain photo.
Oh yeah, it's in the book.
Okay.
You'll have to see if you
you got a picture of it in the book? Okay.
Yeah, it's there at Wagon Wheel Gap. I think it's in the introduction.
Okay.
You see, Jeff goes to Tolkien and I go to Twin Peaks.
Oh, I love that show. Right? Yeah, that small town sort of crazy.
In between two mountains, yeah.
Well,
Just as crazy. Yeah.
Well, you live in Santa Fe now. Are you going to end up trying to do one of the ghost tour type things there, or are you researching the different haunted places and the history there to do another book?
I haven't thought about doing a book about Santa Fe because there are quite a few books about Santa Fe ghosts already. But I have done a ghost tour here, and I have a friend and a mentor really who has shared his stories with me, and it's a fascinating place to live and to sort of to do these tours. It's really cool because there are 400 years of history here in Santa Fe. We're the oldest state capital in the country, and there are a lot of really great stories, ghost stories, and I think the ghosts in Santa Fe are a little bit scarier than the ghosts in Creede because they are older and just a little more malevolent.
Ah, wow. All right, our time is running right on down. And Barbara, do you have any last thing before we start wrapping up?
No, I'm just actively looking for the monster map.
Oh, yeah, it'd be great if you could post that one.
Which peak is it again?
I don't know what the name of it is. In the book, it's on page 27.
Okay.
Oh, and there's another picture of it on page 20.
Okay. I will post one.
Awesome.
Barbara will find it. I can guarantee that. Okay. We are down to under 2 minutes. So what I want you to do is I want you to give out all your information, how people can follow you, contact you, or get your book or whatever. And then I want you to stay on till after we're off, and we'll talk.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. Yeah, the book can be found on Amazon or through the publisher, which is Arcadia Publishing. If you just go to their site and search for Haunted Creede, you can order it online. If you're in the Creede area, it's sold locally at a number of different stores. And you can find me on Facebook at Creede Ghost Tour or creedeghosttour.com. You can also find me there.
Okay. And if they wanted to contact you, if somebody else wanted to get you on for another show, they can just find you that way.
Yeah, my phone number, and my email is there at creedeghosttour.com.
Okay. Sounds
or my email, which is creedeghosttour@gmail.com.
All right.
It's an easy one.
Excellent. So with that, Jeff, you got anything if you can actually talk now?
Thanks for coming on.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
Barbara?
Maybe you can type your question and I can answer it for you later.
There you go.
Barbara, you got anything?
Oh, I'm sure it'll work perfectly after the show's over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Remember, everybody, wear your mask, wash your hands, and back off.
All right. Until then, next week we'll see you at the same time. So this is Henry Foister.
Jeffrey Gould.
And Barbara Duncan.
And let me get to my little thing here. And we will be saying...
Whoa, not that kind of show here.
Good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.